My name is Khellil Sefiane. I'm from the University of Edinburgh. I have been asked by the organizers to chair this special panel together with my colleague, Professor Lou, from the French Research Center, now, France. It's a great honor to do this, but at the same time is a big responsibility. So I hope that the panel goes smoothly, and I hope that we will have a civil debate. We have people around this table who come from different areas, speak different languages. However, the debate will be in English, but the true universal language should be science. True international universal language people speak is science. Science is not a dogma, not a philosophy, not a political idea. Science is a methodology. What is the objective of this methodology is to get to the truth. That's what science is. And science autocorrects itself. People can propose theories, they can show results, and the scientific community looks into that, and they can either accept theories or reject them. And in history of science, debates like this one are not unusual. There have been debates in history about theories. Some of them were rejected at the end, and some of them were accepted. One of the examples, I'd like to give you examples of these debates. Next slide, please. All of you know, and you are here for an international heat transfer conference, the caloric theory of heat was proposed by many scientists, including the greatest French chemist, Lavoisier, and it was accepted by many great scientists. But after Thomson and Joule did their experiments, they demonstrated that the caloric theory is wrong, and now we teach our students that this is an obsolete theory. Another thing, next slide please. Another example where a theory has been rejected, but it turned out to be correct. Statistical thermodynamics. Boltzmann had a very hard time convincing his colleagues that atoms and molecules exist. And most of you know that Boltzmann ended up taking his own life for many reasons, but because he had a hard time and the scientific community did not accept his theory. And now we teach statistical thermodynamics in all universities around the world. The third example I wanted to give, next please, is the very idea of quantum mechanics. When quantum mechanics was proposed by the Copenhagen School under the leadership of Niels Bohr, it was rejected. And the person who rejected it at first was Albert Einstein. A lot of you know this picture. This is from Solvay conference in 1927. And this is where the debate took place. So you see the people on the right-hand side, Niels Bohr, Heisenberg, those were the defenders of the quantum mechanics. And Albert Einstein there in the middle was against quantum. But by the end of that conference, apparently, Albert Einstein conceded and accepted the argument of quantum mechanics. And a lot of historians, they say you can see it on the faces, because the quantum mechanics defenders are smiling, and Albert Einstein has a little grin. So these are examples where, in history, where sometimes theories are presented and they are rejected or they could be accepted. That's because science is not a dogma. Don't tell people have to believe in it. There is no belief in science. Science is about evidence. And it's not about nationality or culture or language. An experiment, if it's done in the United States, should be able to be repeated in China and people find this. So why are we meeting here today? We are meeting in this panel to discuss a very, very important concept. Next, please. This concept has been introduced about 15 years ago by a group here in China led by Professor Guo. It was published in the literature. I will not go into the technical details because we have expert speakers who do that better than me. But this idea has been used by other groups around the world, and it has been rejected by other groups. And then there has been a debate in the literature, what is this idea worth? Is it something that we need, or is it something that we don't need? And the objective of the panel today is precisely to debate this idea. So we are very lucky and fortunate to have been able to gather eminent scientists who are experts in this field, who will give us their opinions. We are moderators, so we are supposed to be neutral, and we try to be neutral. However, our speakers will give us their opinions, and they are entitled to give their opinions. And after the presentations, we will open the floor for questions and debate. And you can also have the opportunity to express your opinion. Everybody has a right to express their opinion. And then by the end of this panel, hopefully we can reach some sort of conclusion in a civil way. So let me briefly, next slide please, introduce our speakers. So the first speaker will be Professor Guo, on the right-hand side. Professor Guo is in the Department of Engineering Mechanics at Tsinghua University in China. He is a highly cited researcher, 2014, 2015. He is recipient of the Outstanding Achievement Award of the Asian Union of Thermal Sciences. His current research is on heat transfer enhancement, optimization, and Entransy, thermal mass, and thermodynamics. The second speaker is Professor Annie Steichen on the right-hand side. She's not with us. You can see her name there on the table. But we will have her virtually from France. So she's waiting for us in France now. She will join us via a satellite connection to Skype. And Professor Steichen started her career in 1960 as an assistant professor at the Polytechnic School of Brussels under the supervision of Professor Raymond Defay, who is one of the founders of the modern capillarity, the science of surface tension. She later went to work in the group of Ilya Prigozhin, the Nobel laureate in 1979, and then she moved to the south of France to continue her career. She also worked with Professor François Englert, the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2013. And her area of expertise is non-equilibrium thermodynamics. We have two more eminent speakers, and I let my colleague introduce them.
Thank you. It's my great honor to introduce Professor Hans Herwig, Professor of Department of Mechanical Engineering and of Hamburg University of Technology. with expertise in engineering, physics, and aeronautical engineering. He headed the Institute of the Thermofluid Dynamics until 2016 and is the author of more than 10 technical books in the field of thermofluid dynamics. The last speaker is Professor Milivoje Kostiks. He is an emerite professor of mechanical engineering at Northern Illinois University. He is the editor-in-chief of the thermodynamics section of the journal Entropy. He is an expert in energy fundamental and applications, including nanotechnology, efficiency energy use, energy conservation, environment, and sustainability. For information to answer a fair debate of the topic, the panel session is scheduled from each side, whether in favor and against. Thus, we also invite some other international leaders in the against side. Unfortunately, they are not available due to many early scheduled tasks and scheduled summer obligations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, just to confirm what my colleague said, we did our best to invite people around the world, and some of them could join us today and some apologize. So we open to all scientists active in this area. Now let me very briefly explain how we're going to do this. So we have 4 speakers. Each speaker is going to give a presentation of about 15 minutes maximum. They can speak for less if they wish so. We will not have questions between the presentations. After the 4 presentations, we will open the floor for discussion and debate. If there are people who wish to express their opinion or show some slides, we would welcome them to join the presentation. With no further ado, let me start with the first speaker of this panel, and I'd like to invite Professor Go to give the first presentation.
Good afternoon. The title of my presentation is Entropy, a core quantity in heat transfer. Something like entropy is a core quantity in the thermodynamics. First of all, why should we introduce the new quantity entropy? Followed by how to introduce this quantity entropy, and we will move to where can the entropy be applied. Finally, I like to talk about the difference between entropy and entropy, because entropy is an important quantity either in thermodynamics and in physics. Okay. So, Prigogine in 1947 developed the minimum entropy generation principle for transport process in his instability theory. And Professor Beijing in 1979 extended this principle to the optimization of heat transfer called thermodynamic optimization. However, we find the minimum entropy generation method is not always suitable for the optimization of heat transfer process. Due to the time limitation, I just gave you one example. Here is optimization heat conduction, so-called volume-to-point problem. This is similar to the chip cooling problem. Heat delivered from heat source in the domain, then removed via conduction through 2 points at T1 and T2. And T1, oh, how is it? T1 keeps constant, 300, not good, 300, but T2 is variable from 300 down to the 160, and other boundaries are adiabatic. And the problem of formulation is how to find the optimal distribution of thermal conductivity to make the domain the lowest temperature. Okay, then let's have a look at the curve. This black curve is for the situation of uniform distribution of thermal conductivity. Oh, this longitudinal axis is domain temperature. The transverse axis is T2, is a variable temperature. And with the T2 going down, of course, the domain temperature will reduce gradually. This curve is a broad curve, is a situation for the optimal distribution thermodynamic based on minimum entropy generation principle. We can see the domain temperature is much lower than the situation for the uniform thermal conductivity distribution. And another point is you can see with the T2 going on, the domain temperature slightly reduced. Okay, oh, I go a little bit too fast. For the optimal distribution of thermal conductivity based on the minimum entropy distribution principle, the domain temperature is reduced at first. However, when the temperature less than 240, the domain temperature does not decrease but increase. That means in this case, the minimum entropy generation principle is not suitable for the heat conduction optimization in this case. Then I move to the part 2. How to introduce interest in heat transfer. As you know, since the 19th century, the analogy between heat and electric conduction has been widely applied in the many aspects, including solving the complex heat conduction problem. However, a physical quantity is missing in this analogy between various corresponding quantities in the heat and electric conduction. What is the missed quantity? Let's see. Okay. Here is electric conduction. We have transfer law, the Ohm's law. Quite known. We have transfer equation, one-dimensional, and we have electric charge and potential electric voltage and electric potential energy like that. Now we can see what about heat conduction. Similarly, we have also Fourier's law and one-dimensional conduction equation. We have charge, we have heat. This is correspond to the transferred charge. And we have also potential T, the temperature and voltage correspondence. However, we have lack a quantity correspond to the electric energy. Then this is okay. All right. We have so what do we have lacking? This is what that means this is thermal energy, this is temperature. So this term is how to say the half product of thermal energy multiplied by temperature. And we call this term is entrancy of a solid object. Solid means without volume variation, without heat to work conversion. And you may raise a question, what about the physical meaning of entropy? In order to answer this question more deeply, we need to introduce another new concept, thermal mass. According to the Einstein's mass-energy relation, we have thermal mass, that means thermal energy or square of speed of light. Then we can have potential energy of thermal mass in the temperature field like this one. If we remove this factor, lead to this expression, what is this expression? This is entropy. So, entropy is nothing but the simplified expression of the thermal mass energy. Okay? Then, it is for the energy of entropy. So, the entropy of a solid bed represents the ability of heat transfer during time period. Just like the electric potential energy of a battery represents its charge transfer ability. So, entropy can be also derived from the detective method. Here we have an energy equation. If we multiply both sides of the energy equation by temperature, then lead to the balance equation of entropy. Here, this is the entropy variation. This term is the entropy transfer. This one is the entropy dissipation rate. I like to know the heat is conserved during the transfer process because it has nature of mass, while entropy is dissipated during transfer process because its own nature of energy. So dissipation rate can measure the heat transfer irreversibility too, because we know entropy generation can measure the heat transfer irreversibility. So, because the entropy dissipation can measure the heat transfer irreversibility, so a new principle has been developed. That is the principle of minimum entropy dissipation based thermal resistance. Perhaps it's not well known. The thermal resistance, the R, that means temperature difference over heat flow, is valid only for the one-dimensional conduction because definition of temperature difference has arbitrariness for the non-uniform temperature boundary. Okay? So, however, now it's possible for us to define the thermal resistance based on entropy dissipation for the 2 or 3D heat transfer problems. Here is entropy dissipation based thermal resistance. This is the entropy dissipation rate over square of heat flow. So the principle of minimum entropy dissipation based thermal resistance states the performance of heat transfer, notably without heat work conversion, is optimized if the minimum entropy dissipation based thermal resistance is minimized. Part 3. So let's back to the heat conduction open-line problem. We just show this one for based on the principle of minimum entropy dissipation. And if we use the minimum entropy dissipation principle, we can see that the average temperature, domain temperature decreases linearly with a decreasing T2 based on the minimum entropy dissipation thermal resistance. That means the entropy dissipation rate as an optimization criterion is better than the entropy generation rate. We just gave another question, the heat convection optimization. Based this principle, we can obtain the optimal velocity field for the tube flow heat convection. You can see for the optimal velocity, we must have multi-vortex in the cross section. About the pipe manufacturing, we have cooperation with the Japanese company Daikin. This enhanced tube has been used CO2 water heat in the heat pump and has been mass production. The result is very nice. The weight from 62 points down to 62. That means material saving about 8%. So, part 4. What about the difference between entropy and entropy? As you know, the entropy as a state quantity is a function of two independent parameters. However, for entropy, is a function only of temperature, a single parameter. And this the differential expression. And if the heat capacity is constant, then we can get the expression of entropy is this is a mass, this is heat capacity, and T squared and 2 half. It's just half thermal energy, half product of thermal energy and the temperature. About the physical meaning, for the entropy is the ability of heat to work conversion. And for the entropy is ability of heat transfer rate. It's quite different. One is conversion, one is rate. And for the process quantity, for the entropy flow, the heat flow over temperature. For the entropy flow is the heat multiplied by temperature. If we talk the irreversibility measure, the entropy generation rate more suitable for the irreversibility for the thermodynamic process. And for the interdisciplinary is more suitable for the heat transfer process. Last one is in the entropy theory, we have a least action principle. That means the minimum entropy dissipation rate can lead to the Fourier's conduction law. But in entropy, have no right now have no least action principle. So with the next slide, I like to close my presentation. Is entropy is a co-physical quantity in heat transfer because entropy represents the ability of heat transfer, and the entropy dissipation rate is the action of heat conduction. That means when the action to the minimum, you can have the Fourier conduction law. And entropy dissipation can measure the heat transfer irreversibility too. Finally, entropy dissipation is an optimizing criterion of heat transfer. Then thank you very much for your attention.
So let's go 15 minutes.
15 minutes? Okay.
Perfect. And now we would like to move to the second speaker. So we just listened to Professor Go, who is the founder of this concept. And now we would like to listen to Professor Howard. Please.
Okay, I would like to talk about what you can read just here, and three hands. Okay, this is just to show you where I come from, a tiny little town in the northern part of Germany, not even 2 million inhabitants, so very small for a Chinese situation. Okay, so let me just recall the classical concept of heat transfer, because this is the background of what we are talking about. So it is that we have the first law, that is, energy is conserved, state variable. It is in all physical situations, it can neither be destroyed nor created. We have the second law, energy can be converted from one form to another. There are, however, certain constraints. They are that entropy is never destroyed during an energy conversion process. So we are talking about energy conversion, and about entropy and entropy generation. Now, we are in general talking about thermodynamic systems. We have a system boundary, and we have within the system different forms of energy. Doesn't work. We have different forms of energy, internal, kinetic, and potential energy. And these energy are state quantities. That means characteristic quantity that account for certain aspects of the state in which the system happens to be. Examples are energy, pressure, temperature, entropy, and some more. And we have forms of energy transfer, which are process variables. That means characteristic quantities that account for the way in which certain state quantities are changed. Examples are energy transport across system boundaries, entropy generation, and so on. A very important point in this respect is that state quantities are path independent. That means with a state quantity you cannot see how it got into this state. That, for example, means the internal energy cannot be subdivided in different parts. You cannot identify what has been brought into the internal energy by heat, in form of heat or in form of work. It is just path independent. I think this is very important for what we are talking about today. Okay, now we extend this and introduce the entropy concepts, and I have two questions. One is entransy an extension of the well-established theory of heat transfer consistent with the classical approach? And the second question is there a real need for the extension of the classical theory by introducing entransy as a quantity that was missing in the past? Well, first question about the consistency. If you look at the definition of entransy, it has been shown before here. It's the internal energy times temperature. And if you look at it, the dimension is energy times temperature. So it's not an energy times temperature. The units are joule times Kelvin. And the meaning is said to be some kind of a potential energy of the thermal energy. Now, my first problem is, by dimensions, entransy is not an energy. As you see, units are joule times Kelvin. If I quote from the publications about entransy, you find entransy is a simplified expression of the potential energy of a phonon gas. You just heard it before. So a simplified version by just skipping two quantities c and the speed of light to the square. Now, problem two, entransy can be dissipated, and if I again quote from the publications, it says the dissipation of entransy is in fact the dissipation of the potential energy of the phonon gas. But this entransy is just a simplified version of it. So it's On the one hand, it is the dissipation of the energy of the phonon gas, but what they use is a simplified version of this quantity, which is called Entransy. That's a problem for me. Third problem, the protagonists of Entransy obviously assume that heat can be stored as thermal charge in a system. This is what you can find word by word in the publications. Now, heat is a process quantity, and a process quantity cannot be stored. So heat cannot be stored in a system. Next point is it can be individually identified as part of the internal energy of that system. And this cannot happen because state quantities are path independent. So you cannot identify certain parts of the internal energy as coming from some transfer by heat. Second question is about if it is a real need for the extension of the classical theory. Well, if you look at the motivation which is given, then you find, however, an irreversible heat transfer process seems to have its own particularity, for the heat energy always remains constant during transfer, and it doesn't appear to be readily clear what is the non-conserved quantity in heat transfer process. Now, my problem 4 is that there is a well-established non-conserved quantity in the heat transfer process already, and it is exergy. With exergy destruction as a measure of the irreversibility of heat transfer ready for optimization procedures. So my question finally is, how good is a new physical quantity that has at least 4 problems? We can discuss it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Herwig. So we listened to Professor Herwig. Now we move to the third speaker, Professor Annie Steenschen. She can't join us today, but she's on Skype. We will listen to her in real time. So she's sitting somewhere in south of France, but she's going to join us by his name.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, we can see you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can see you.
You can see me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So,
Annie, can you see the slides? We need to have the slides. The PowerPoint.
I don't see the slides.
They will come in a second.
Okay.
Can you switch the camera?
Yes,
You can
I see.
Perfect. So you can start,
It's okay.
Annie.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am very happy to give my talk here, and I thank the IHTC committee for inviting me to give the talk about non-Fourier heat conduction by a method of irreversible thermodynamics. The content of my talk is the following. First, an introduction on the Fourier and Onsager laws. Then, a slide about the optimization principles and the variational methods. And also the study of the stability of stationary and transient states by irreversible thermodynamic, classical and extended irreversible thermodynamics, applied specially to transport phenomena because we are here, our concern is heat transfer. Then I will introduce also the very important contribution of Professor Guo and his team with his least entrancey dissipation theorem, and give the link of this theorem with the classical and the extended irreversible thermodynamics, and then also another important contribution of the GU and co-worker team, the thermomass model generalization of the entropy production for nonlinear transport phenomena. Next. So, first, the Fourier and Onsager law. It's a very old story that begins in the 19th century with the empirical laws of Fourier, and in the 20th century, in 1931, with the Onsager laws. Those laws relate the forces, the driving forces, to the fluxes by linear laws, and the choice of these laws is quite arbitrary. And, for instance, in the approach of Fourier, the force is considered as being the negative of the temperature gradient, while for Onsager, the driving force for heat transfer is considered to be the gradient of the reverse of the temperature. So different coefficients, constant, are defined. For Fourier, the well-known Fourier heat conductivity, and for Onsager, the Onsager coefficient. Those two coefficients, of course, are linked, and even when the coefficients depend on the temperature, one can always define parameters, weighting function, that can give allow to recover linear laws. When, however, the forces depend on the fluxes or depend on the gradient of the temperature, then it's another story, and in the next slides we will talk about this. The next, please. Here you see the arbitrariness of the definition of forces and fluxes. The so-called entropy production has to be positive, and it was first taken as a Lagrangian function, but its property is that it is invariant of the choice of the forces and the fluxes. So you can define various forces and various fluxes, but always the production, entropy production, has to remain positive. Here you see the definition of Fourier and Onsager, which are compared, and the link between Fourier and Onsager coefficient through a weighting function, and in this case the weighting function is the square of the temperature. You can also define as forces minus the gradient of the log of temperature, and then the weighting function, a positive weighting function, has to be the temperature. The next slide, please. Next. When using this weighting function, of course, we can analyze also the stability of either the stationary states or even the non-steady states, the transient state. And in order to do that, Glasdorf and Prigogine, first Glasdorf in 1965, and Prigogine and Glasdorf in 71, they have defined Lagrangian formulation that proves the regression of the fluctuation towards a state that is the most probable state, and that state, the most probable state, is also the more efficient state. So half the quantity that is the second derivative of entropy derived in time, this quantity is called by Prigogine and Glanzdorf the excess entropy production. And this quantity has to be positive in order for the regression of the fluctuations according to a theorem due to Einstein of the regression of the fluctuations. And the functional so defined depends on two quantities, a fluctuating temperature and either steady state or time-dependent state, but non-fluctuating. And the regression of the fluctuation will lead the system to go back to the most probable state, which is also the most efficient one. Next slide, please. Here is the Lagrangian formulation. You see the Lagrangian quantity function is half the product of the square temperature of the reference state multiplied by the Fourier coefficient in the reference state, both multiplied by the square of the gradient of the reverse temperature. And the derivative of these Lagrange functions gives the functional, which is half the quantity under the integral sign, and this quantity related to the square of the gradient of the difference between the reverse fluctuating temperature and the reverse reference temperature. This quantity integrated over the whole space has to be positive in order for the regression of the fluctuations. And this theorem is quite similar to the theorem introduced recently in 2003 by Guo and his co-worker for optimization of the heat conduction. Next slide, please. Now, this functional called by Glanzdorf and Prigogine the local potential has a minimum property that gives him the property to be an optimizing function. But this quantity, this local potential, has a minimum quite different from the minimum of the entropy production whose minimum is reached only for linear laws. In the next slide you can see also, next slide please, the difference between the minimum of the functional of the local potential and the minimum of the entropy production. The minimum of the entropy production was widely used for optimizing heat transfer, but is far from being a general property, the minimum of entropy production, to be used for optimizing heat transfer. Because when the system doesn't be a Fourier system, is a non-Fourier system, then you have to use the local potential or the theorem given by Guo as being the least Entransy dissipation theorem, which has the same properties as the local potential introduced by Prigogine and Glanzdorf, and it's more efficient than other optimization criterion used before. So in the next, yes, also for even for non-linear, very non-linear systems, you can also use these two theorems, both the Guo theorem and the Prigogine and Glamsdorf. And here the Guo theorem of least entrancy dissipation has the same mathematical form as the Glamsdorf and Prigogine local potential. And you see their mathematical properties is totally the same. Now, the next slide, please. Here, the theorem, the local potential theorem for optimization or stability of the systems, either transient or stationary states, this local potential, which is half the integral of the product of the Fourier coefficient times the square of the reference temperature multiplied by the square gradient of the reversed temperature of the fluctuating temperature and the reverse of the reference temperature. This quantity gives, of course, the driving force for heat transfer, and the square of this driving force multiplied by this factor is the same as the Guo function of the least entrancy dissipation. And it is valid both for transient and stationary states, for the regression of the fluctuation and the coming back of the system to the best functioning of the system, the most probable state. Next, please. Next. Now, in extended thermodynamics, the problem is that the force considered by the authors of the extended irreversible thermodynamic, they introduced in the force, driving force for heat transfer, a quantity related to the time variation of the heat flux. And this gives rise to a law of heat transfer, which is the so-called Maxwell-Cataneo equation for the heat flux. And this equation for heat flux is quite similar to the telegraphist equation for transmission of the radio waves. And this approach of extended irreversible thermodynamics matches also with a very important new approach of the Guo team. It's the approach of the thermomass principle that gives rise to an equivalence of each quantity of energy transferred to a mass by the Einstein equivalence of energy and mass. The next, please, next slide. And both approaches, thermodynamic, the classical irreversible thermodynamics or the extended one, give rise to an expression of the entropy production. And these two approaches, compared with the approach developed by Gu and co-worker with the thermomass development, which gives as an equivalence of the quantity of energy stored in the system. It attributes to this energy a mass, an equivalent mass, and they consider that this mass moves with a velocity u that is related to the quantity of heat transferred and to the heat capacity and to the temperature. And when this mass moves with this velocity u, it undergoes a friction force. And the product of this friction force with the velocity of the mass, the equivalent mass, gives rise to a new expression of the entropy production that is coherent in both approaches, the approach of Gu and co-workers and the approach of the extended thermodynamics. It's quite similar, the properties of the entropy production obtained in the thermomass model of Gu and the expression of the entropy production given by the extended thermodynamics. So I invite you here, next slide please, to read the two new publications developed by Chao and Gu in the Journal of Heat and Mass Transfer and in PhysRev in 2013 and 2018. They give the development of this new method, the thermomass method, which is really a novel and very innovative method of giving the explanation of how we can manage heat transfer when very complex heat transfer occur, like the second sound phonon heat transfer in solids. Now, a conclusion. Next slide, please. This optimization criterion given by Gu and his team matches both with the classical and with the extended irreversible thermodynamics, and the thermomass model based on Einstein mass energy equivalence is consistent with the extended irreversible thermodynamics, and it's a very important, powerful and very novel method in thermodynamics. So I have to thank the audience for his patience and to apologize for my very bad English. Next slide, please, for giving you my best thanks, and also best thanks for the team of Gu and to all my friends, scientists, because it's a really pleasure to make science with friends. I thank you a lot.
Thank you very much, Annie. Just one comment. Annie, can you see us? Can you turn the camera? Just to tell you, Professor Gu wanted to get very close to listen. He sat in your chair.
Yeah.
You can enter.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Hello, Professor Gu.
And thank you very much, Annie, for this very impressive talk. and a very interesting history of thermodynamics. Now I will invite the professor to speak for your presentation.
Now I need a microphone. We actually have our presentation seen on this display and a big timer. So if I do not turn to the slides, I see it over here. And I will be talking down to earth and hope everybody will understand what I'm talking about, because those are very basic principles. Next slide. Hello everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to present a holistic, that's important, phenomenological reasoning of some critical issues in thermoscience and entrancy. This presentation has same title as detailed in the paper published last year in International Journal of Heat and Mass Transfer. Next slide. Entrancy is actually a very simple quantity. It is heat times temperature. I know that Professor Herwig's hair will rise immediately, but I'll talk about it later. And actually, it's a stored heat time temperature. Sure, we could store heat. There is a heat capacity as a property. And there is a thermal motion and interactions and potentials between thermal motions and energy. Internal energy is not all the same. We cannot say that electrical charge is the same as heat. If we heat a capacitor, it's not the same as charging. If we heat a spring, it will get hot because it has thermal capacity. It's a property tabulated in tables. And if I compress it with the same energy, same internal energy, a very different kind. And we used to simplify, and we shouldn't. For example, we say there is a heat and work and nothing else. That's not true. There is a heat and many different, quite different types of works. But in classical thermodynamics, we do all analysis for simple compressive substances, and we focus on heat and compression work. But there is a bending work, twisting work, there is electrical work, and chemical work, and nuclear work, and probably some more that we don't know. But you need a system structure to allow for those. And I wish if we call heat thermal work, with quite different properties than other works. And I can't believe that heat cannot be stored in a system. It is stored, everybody knows it. It's like when scientists were talking, when airplanes were invented, the very famous scientists were saying, you cannot make anything fly if it's heavier than air. And my son, I told it to my son as a historian, he said, didn't they see the birds fly? And also, the problem with entrancy is not entrancy. It's actually stored heat. It's thermal energy, and I'm working on it. And it is very hard to define in general. It is very obvious for isochoric processes, control volume processes, because if it's a simple substance which allows only work and compression work and heat, and if it's constant volume, then it's only heat. And then internal energy is basically thermal energy. And entrancy as such will be thermal energy times temperature. And it has a very deep physical meaning, like all other fluxes as related to charges and potentials. It could be defined as a rate when it is transferred. In differential form, it could be balanced the way we balanced exergy, because entrancy actually represents quality and quantity of thermal energy. And that's actually advantage of it. It has some disadvantages like everything else. Next slide. So, entrancy is extended thermal energy. Extended means its unit is Joule Kelvin, but it doesn't matter. So the physical laws, the nature does not obey physical laws or our English definitions or whatever language. Nature works on its own, and we then make up physical laws and definitions to describe those. So there is an issue, we could debate it. I would be glad to spend any time possible. Actually, Professor Herwig wrote an interesting paper that I read last night, and my brain hurt, I must say. And he motivated me even to talk more about, to think more about it. Next slide. There are those so-called Entransy criticizers. And I was reading their papers, and I was reading answers to those critiques, and it's interesting that those papers had a focus to criticize and nothing else. They did not do comprehensive analysis of positives and negatives and then to draw some objective conclusions. They had like objective to dismiss it. And I know Beijing said it doesn't have physical constant because it is like entropy times T square, and then instead of a square it could be any exponent n. So you could have many entrances. That's not true. Square comes from constant volume integration of internal energy and temperature. And then some of them say it is redundant to entropy. We have double problem here. Most of the fundamental quantities are redundant. For example, enthalpy is U plus PV. Why do we need H if we have U and P and V? Exergy is combination of other quantities, and there are thermodynamics books which never mention exergy at all. They do all analysis of work availability, no word exergy. But it's a nice combination of properties, it's a nice redundancy. And so is Entransy for so-called pure heat transfer processes. Heat transfer is a very interesting phenomenon. The reason is because all other energy types dissipate into heat and generate entropy. That's why universality. So it's a measure of everything coming to equilibrium. And it appears that some harsh criticism without due rigor of impartial and all-inclusive analysis of positive and negatives of a newly developing concepts is not justified. We have a lot of problems in thermal sciences and thermodynamics, not just 4. We have many, many more, and we should be talking about it. And objectively judging a new concept is challenging, and it requires comprehensive and critical analysis by many over a long time. Thank you. Next slide. So, regardless of redundancy, and let's say for free energy is U minus Ts, and the Gibbs free energy is U minus Ts plus PV. It's all redundant. And they are very useful. Enthalpy is useful for isobaric processes, Gibbs function for isothermal isobaric processes, and so on. So despite the need of further, does Entransy has deficiencies? Yes, it does. And it has to be improved. But again, we need to be reminded that Lavoisier was working on caloric, and it was like dismissed. That's a pity. Nothing is wrong with caloric. Caloric is conserved in caloric processes. Calorimetry is the most fundamental experimentation today for measuring thermodynamic properties. It just needs to be augmented with new things in addition to caloric. We cannot say now conservation of energy is not valid just because of Einstein's mc squared, because it's not conserved, because mass could be converted to energy. Conservation of energy is augmented with new basically knowledge, and so has to be done with caloric. And it looks like that those criticizers think that new alternatives are not needed, as if everything is perfect and as if further progress is not needed. Next slide. By the way, I was aware of Entransy for a long time. This is my first paper I wrote last year in International Journal of Heat and Mass Transfer because reading everything I said, I need to say something. And Entransy was basically defined as mc v t squared over 2. That 2 comes from integration of a constant volume. I'm not concerned about constant. In principle, it's basically Q times T, the way Q over T is entropy. And then we could talk about what symbol means or what definition is. But of course, it should be done by integration because CV is variable property. Next slide. And also, since Entransy is a property, then it has to be defined for everything, not only for what it is good. It is good for caloric processes, but it has to be defined for work, the way exergy is defined for heat. And I derived this equation circled number 15 because in the literature before, there was another expression derived by algebraic manipulation. I derived this from the need to satisfy conservation of entropy for ideal reversible processes. Next slide. Of course, since Entransy describes quality and quantity and quality of heat, if you like, and I like that word heat, regardless that some people don't. And basically, we know what it is. And that's the name of our conference, I guess. And then Entransy will be dissipated. Dissipated means lost to something else, converted to something else. And in that way, it is similar to exergy. So I argue that we should do similarity Entransy and exergy, not entropy. Of course, both are function of entropy. And both dissipates because of entropy generation, but entropy is another animal. It's actually thermal space. It's thermal space. Next slide. In that paper that I published, I introduced Entransy functional potential as a clean property. And that's very interesting. I'm not aware that in any literature this was done in this way. And next slide. Now, I augmented thermodynamic functional potentials with so-called work functional potential. Work functional potential, second line in a table, is just PV. It's property because P and V are property. And heat functional potential, it's a fourth line, which is TS. It's a property. It's a product of two other properties. And those are used in enthalpy and in free energy. And then if we expand now Entransy as this heat functional potential, Ts times T, we got St squared. And that's a clean property. None of those are equal to their own names. Work functional potential is property, but work is not. So the two are not equal, but there is a correlation and they are good for analysis. And next slide. I like to say a couple more words. I think this clock is running fast. Wasn't calibrated recently. About entropy. And I think, with all due respect, very accomplished people in their own area do not fully comprehend the essence of the second law. They try to say, second law is energy needs to increase in isolated system or in a closed system or in inanimated system or whatever. That's a general rule. Energy is always produced. Otherwise it would be conserved if it's transferred. And that's true for any scale, time or space scale. Those fluctuations that people measure are not any violation of the second law. I would be glad to talk with them as much as I can. And next slide. About Maxwell-Dimon. I wrote paper, it has to be published. I basically figured out why Maxwell-Dimoen will not be passive. And nobody made it in 151 years now, because Maxwell was trying to take advantage of micro non-equilibrium at the velocities of the molecules to make a macro non-equilibrium. But this non-equilibrium makes up the macro equilibrium, so you cannot negate it. And he was thinking to separate molecule at a time. And that is not possible also because thermal motion doesn't have any directional preference to be utilized. And when you open gate to pass a selected molecule, the other simultaneously moving molecules will be competing and using that opportunity, and to prevent their own interference you need additional work, and I call it U work, and that's actually thermodynamics work to accomplish non-equilibrium. Everybody was focusing on the work to operate the gate. That's an auxiliary non-important work. It could be perfected to near reversibility with basically no work at all, misleading you that you could violate second law using those devices. And similar problems have all researchers out there. I will be blunt to say, because I'm a professor emeritus, not competing for grants or for publications. I could say anything I want about science. And somebody said, with all due respect, science is, yeah, you could cut me anytime you like. I noticed everybody was running longer, a little longer. Yeah, so basically, science is not politics, it's not this, and it's not that. Science is all of it. And it's our own, basically, imagination, and we argue about it, and that's not bad either. And maybe next slide, which is the last slide. Or there is no need. I would ask organizers to post my slides for everybody to have it. And actually, I'm now running a special issue of Entropy Journal, and flyers for that special issues are with those young volunteers with red shirts and those young beautiful ladies, and my business cards, but you could find me very easily searching my last name on the web. Thank you for your attention, and then next slide is last slide. This, yeah, you could run through. So entropy is not any disorder that many claim. Entropy is only basically thermal energy disorder and nothing else. And the last slide is basically my contact information. And I might be one who had the shortest presentation, actually. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So this actually brings to a close our presentations. And before we start the debate, I would like just to say one short thing. And, since we are in China, there is a Chinese proverb that says, when the finger points to the moon, the fool looks to the finger. And in the Buddhist tradition, they say the teachers are the finger pointing to the moon. So in science, the scientists are the finger pointing to the moon. So we shouldn't look to the finger, we shouldn't mention people by name. We should have a civilized debate about ideas, and I urge my colleagues not to mention people by name
Those are published papers.
That's fine. So I hope that people will not get into personal consideration. Now I'd like to open the floor for debate. There is one attendant who expressed interest in expressing his opinion, but he needs to show some slides, and I agree to that. I think Professor Tao from Xi'an University wants to start this debate by giving some ideas. Please.
Thank you, Chairman, for giving me this chance. I want to make comment on the consistency and parallelism of Entransy with the previous series. Okay, first, the consistency of Entransy with the field thinking principle. We know that according to Pearson's principle, the smaller the intersecting angle between velocity and temperature gradient, the better heat transfer coefficient. And the degree of synergy can be expressed either by theta angle or by synergy number. Okay, this is the angle, this is synergy number. Okay, the smaller the angle, the greater FC, the better the synergy and the better the heat transfer. From the entry dissipation action principle, for a convective heat transfer process of a given boundary temperature, the base one has a maximum entry dissipation, while for the given boundary heat flux, the base one has a minimum entry dissipation. Now people may ask that if for the same process, analyzed from field FSP and from EDP, are the result consistent? The answer is yes, definitely. We did a lot of numerical simulation. All results show the consistency between FSP and EDP, either by theta or by FC. Now take theta as an indication of synergy. This is flow along the elliptical tube of the fins. One is a plane, other with a voltage generator. Okay. With a voltage generator, we have high heat transfer coefficient. Compared with synergy angle, okay, the basic heat transfer shows the less synergy angle. Okay. Since this is for given temperature, the base one has a higher entry dissipation. So the results are consistent. Next. Now we compare with given heat flux. We have a different combination of such kind of element. Okay. The results show that this one, DD, has the best heat transfer, and this one, SS, has the least heat transfer. Compared with the synergy angle, okay, the best one has a least synergy angle, and the least one has the highest synergy angle. Compared with the anti-dissipation, excited dissipation. Since this is about giving heat flux, so the best one has the least energy dissipation. The least one has the highest energy excited dissipation. So the results are also consistent. Okay, and this was done by me and my colleagues. Next. Now take FC as an indication of synergy angle for the plane fin and the fin with slots at the given wall temperature. Okay, sure, the fin with slotted fin has a high heat transfer coefficient. Compared with the FC, it has a higher FC number. Okay. And compared with the entry dissipation, it has higher dissipation because this is for given wall temperature. Okay. Now, for given heat flux, we have DSSD. Okay. This shows SD has a high heat transfer coefficient. Okay. And it has a high FC number. But this is for given heat flux, so it has the least dissipation of entries. So the results are also constant. And this was did by students and by me. I'm sorry, Professor Fei, I have to mention Professor Beijing because he mentioned me. It's not in very correct way. Okay. Now, the second one, I will show parallelism of micro expression of entropy. You know that this is a great contribution made by Boltzmann. So, entropy is a function of micro state number, as this was in the gravestone in Vienna. Okay, Boltzmann. Okay. No. The entropy increase principle reveals irreversibility of the whole natural process. As just shown by Professor Boltzmann, and entries are also indication to indicate irreversibility of heat transfer process. So people may ask, can we find a micro expression of entries like that of entropy? The answer is yes, at least for the ideal gas system. Okay, in 2010, Professor Liang Xinggang and his student in Tsinghua University found this expression for entries is a function of microstate number for ideal gas of monoatomic molecules. Okay? And stimulated by their work, we extend this one to a system with a diatomic number. Diatomic numbers, molecules. Okay. Start from this system. This is a diatomic molecules, black one and a white one. And I start from first definition of entropy. By using partition function physics, we find obtain this result. Entropy is a function of microstate number of system. So therefore, either for monoatomic and for diatomic molecules, entrance of ideal gas is a function of the microstate number, such as entropy. Therefore, the parallelism between entropy and entrancey is revealed, at least for ideal gas study. Okay, this was done by my student and my colleagues and me. Well, I want to mention very important paper. Right after we published this paper, Professor Beijing published a technical note to criticize our paper. The first paragraph is very important. They use very serious words because it's small. I will share with you by enlarging words at the next page. Okay, recently we found a paper in celebration of the birthday of Beijing. In this paper, they cited the paper wrote by Professor Beijing as a reference file. Right at the file, they wrote also very serious words. I want to share this with you in the next page. This first paragraph of Beijing's paper, he said, I know that the PR China editor of this journal, W.K. Tao, me, has written a paper for his own journal, my journal, in which 45 of his 49 references are authored by a handful of his PR China collaborators. This leaves an impression of citations of cartels, nationalism, not of international journal. Second, the word in the birthday paper, he referred to Beijing, sounds the alarm against publishing practice that give the impression of false science, citation cartels, nationalism, group think, unoriginal work, and the lack of credit given to original sources. Now, I want to draw my colleagues' attention. Are such comments reasonable, scientific, and in favor of developing mutual discussion between different technological and science opinions for the international exchange community? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Tao. I understand your passion, but I think I have agreed to chair this panel on one condition, that it should be fair and balanced. And the reason I don't want to mention names, I don't want to mention names of people who are not here because they cannot defend themselves. I'm very happy for anybody to challenge people on this panel, but we cannot challenge somebody who's not here, he cannot, she cannot respond. So with this comment, I'd like to give the opportunity to the audience to challenge the panel, ask them questions, make comments. You're welcome, please. Any questions, any comments?
Just more information. I have invited Professor Beijing and have some exchange with him. We want he has this opportunity to hear his opinion in this debate. He tried to arrange it, but finally he can't. He's not available to be here.
Microphone, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for all colleagues who teach us so many things. I agree for the question we are here to debate on ideas and open what could be the next step to make it at the real level or the conditional of using this or other variables. The president of this session mentioned that over time, sometimes we accept and sometimes not. There are two other situations we accept it and we demonstrate in time that it is false, and the reverse. We refute it, and over time it became, let's say, the truth. But all truth is under condition and it's relative. What I want to mention, that I want to thank our colleague who was on video conference, because she showed us two things. That we made a choice when we defined some physics, and all our reflexing, studying and teaching is under this condition. So we are slaves, or variables and units. We wrote conservative, but we can rewrite conservative on other, we are used with dimensionless and so on, which can make it. So I like when she showed for us that Fourier was written with gravity, and the potential was 1/t. So we can see things which are not. The second, I think, important thing that she showed was also that thermodynamic, we make it in equilibrium, and non-equilibrium we can find another position. This is for the first, let's say, Annie who present these results. I liked also the colleague when you make the exercise, I can say that I'll never be able to make it to demonstrate the work and energy. Then I can add variables which can say, he demonstrated for us work or energy, but he went from one point to the other, and the way he goes, I can define new variables which could be his energy multiplied by space and a curve, which can show beauty or less beauty exercise, which could be also truth. Then it went on versatility, or eventually equivalence or non-equivalence. I think the main exercise is to demonstrate if any variable is useful in some situation, then we can discuss is it thermodynamically consistent or not. So the challenge is to find if any condition is necessary, and if it fits, then it is. And I like also the course our colleague gave us serving during the seminar, where I like because I find some ideas also to teach a student. But in one slide, we have the ratio of entropy, SES0, and exergy, A. I have equivalence or equality. I can say, no, it's not useful. I think it is, and we are all convinced by exergy, by entropy, by the limitation of the first principle. Some work, if I saw, it was on conduction. I didn't read the paper. Sorry, Professor Go. So I went over some. You demonstrate or you show utility, and then went on more general consideration. There are no feeling in physics because we define and we are somehow, let's say, slave. Perhaps it's not a good word. Perhaps the challenge could be, not have the answer. How can I explain it physically to make it feeling? Because entropy, due to the history and the way we teach it and learn, we can feel at least. Boltzmann, when I see it, I know that it's the combination of all microstates. So perhaps the challenge is not, is it or it's not. Let's say it is useful. What is the condition to be useful in which situation? And our challenges, I hope I find time and I go over it. What is the real meaning and how can I feel it and not be longer than that? It was also, so we just thanks all of you for teaching us all the different point of view.
Thank you for the comment. Any questions, comments? Yes?
Thank you very much. I enjoyed this talking and panels very much. My name is Maruyama, Japan. As far as I understand, the Entransy is one of the understanding of nature. And as other people said, it's understanding of some form, I guess. Of course, a combination of some known variable and so on. But my point is, as you said, the science is science, yes. But also, we need accepted by society. For example, how the Entransy is useful, as you said, then we will accept and everyone uses. So maybe the Entransy is very good to optimize heat transfer and saving energy and so on. And then this is accepted in this society, in the world, everyone uses. Maybe it will need some time. So I have a question to Professor Guo. Is there any trend to use Entransy not only in China, but other world and so on, in other countries and so on? This is my question. Is there any, everyone is trying to use the Entransys or the stable and so on? This is my question.
Thank you very much for your question. So I will say yes. There are some professors from water, but it's not very many right now. Okay.
Thank you very much. Any comments from the
Well, to be honest, I have some problems with this kind of discussion. I think we get kind of lost in the details, and we probably should go back to the very basics of it. And if you remember, it was said that Entransy is the reduced or simplified potential energy of the phonon gases. And the simplification is just made without any justification. And then it is said dissipation of entropy of Entransy is the dissipation of the original quantity. So this is a contradiction, and I think we cannot just simply forget it. Yeah? And the next thing is, if it is said that thermal energy is distinguishable within the internal energy, which is a good part of that here, this is a contradiction to the path independence of state quantities, and we again cannot simply forget it. So maybe we can also discuss these kind of points.
I guess Professor Herwig has two questions he wants to.
So the question is the energy's dimension is not joule. So we have a lot of paper about the thermal mass energy paper, because today I have no enough time to talk about that. So about the thermal mass, this is also a new concept. And if the thermal mass in the temperature field, they can own potential energy of thermal mass with a dimension joule. That's the dimension of energy. So we say the entropy is nothing but a simplified of thermal mass energy. For the solid, maybe we can say phonon gas. We can also, for the liquid and for the gas, can also have a thermal mass energy. That's point one. And point two, Professor have also mentioned about internal energy. They cannot be divided. I like to emphasize entropy. This is a quantity is suitable for the heat transfer without density variation, without volume variation. That means without heat to work conversion. This is most of the situation for the heat transfer. So if we talk internal energy, if we talk the entropy, if we talk about exergy, they always close to the heat to work conversion. That's how I like to say that.
Professor Kostik.
I almost forgot what I'm going to say, but basically we have first to in our society to clarify, do we have a stored heat? Is there a thermal energy out there or there is not? Because do we have a specific heat and heat capacity as a property in a material or not? Those are very critical questions. And if we have reversible processes are real measure of equivalency. So if you now assume whatever you take, doesn't matter which material system, ideal gas, solid body, and if it's a constant volume process and you reversible heat it, then that integral TdS will be stored in that body as a thermal energy and nothing else. That's how we increase entropy. If we cannot store thermal energy, we cannot increase entropy in a system, because entropy is the thermal space. So we have a lot of things to clarify, and I have a trouble with simplification of internal energy. It's internal energy, nothing else. But we cannot have a boundary. There is no boundary. There are molecules out there and particles which make up the systems, and they collide, interact, and do whatever. And we imagine the boundary. And we cannot have something in the system and all out there because of some God-given or miraculous things, heat coming out or work coming out. And if we do not have work, If we have only heat transfer, reversible heat transfer, then it's a total differential. Because du is equal TdS, equal dq, you don't need delta for it. But the only reason you have a process variable is because of a trade-off between work and heat. Because of course, your heat depends on the path from state 1 to 2, because work may trade off something and interfere. But we should be able to be more sophisticated than that. And I was privileged not to be at a prime university, not to have a heavy-duty funding, and not to have time to do thinking. All I did in my lifetime in last 10, 15 years was thinking about the second law and entropy. And I would be glad to discuss with anyone that. And in my home, I'm actually a Serbian American. There is you said in your keynote lecture that there is no heat transfer, right? If I remember it. It's energy transfer in form of heat. And I also heard the phrase, nose is a bad term. It is extended part of a body which serves for breathing. And I don't know whether that is better or a nose. I like heat alone, nothing else. But anyhow, that's my opinion. So we have to clarify that before we move on I think, meaning of entransy. And also to say entransy is a physical concept. And applications are up to the creativity of the researchers. So that's another issue. And whether it will be useful or not, time will tell. And space.
Thank you. Narrow questions? Yeah, the anchor. Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Xiaoyun Xie from Tsinghua University. I'm from Department of Building Science and Technology and Engineering Department. And I think to check concept or theory successful or not, we must say its application. And in fact, we use entrancy dissipation very successfully in our engineering department or field. I can see some real cases. We have a thermal group. The leader is Professor Yi Jiang in our field. And this group also including several professors and about 15 students. And we use entrance dissipation in a lot of real applications, such as data center systems, heat storage systems, indirect evaporative cooling systems, and liquid dehumidification systems, and also other HVAC systems very successfully. And we found that using the entrance dissipation, it is the most suitable parameter to describe the heat transfer loss. And we found a local dissipation uniformity principle for optimize these systems, but we cannot use entropy or oxygen to get the uniformity principle. So it is a case to prove the useful of the entrance dissipation. And now also, Professor Yi Jiang has led an international collaboration project called IEA Annex 59. It is called low temperature heating and high temperature cooling. And in this project, about 10 countries attended this project. And we use TQ chart and entrance dissipation as the main tools to analyze the systems. And after the project, several members of this several countries, they become the leaders of their society.
Can you shorten your comments?
Yeah.
Please to be short.
Yeah. So I say because we are from the engineering field and we use the entrance dissipation very successful. So I think we must say the application of entrance dissipation. Yeah.
Okay. I would say, because we don't have time, we will just take questions. We don't take comments. Okay. If you have a question, panel, please ask questions. If you have a comment, leave it to later. Okay? Any questions to the panel? No comments, please.
Yeah, I have a question because I'm quite confused and I didn't make up my mind up to now if we really need entrancy or not. But my question is, and I formulated in a question, so to make you happy. Do we have to rethink, if we have to distinguish, can clearly distinguish between state properties and process properties, because we mix sometimes in these discussions, from my opinion, stored energy, internal energy, thermal energy, and heat. So do we have to rethink and redefine, also in all those thermodynamic lectures, not only in the heat transfer lectures, our state property thinking and process property thinking?
Okay, I'd like the panel to answer, but Annie, please, you're welcome to answer. I know you're online. So if you would like to comment.
Well, I think that the way Entransy is introduced is very interesting because I make no difference between process property or thermodynamic property. I think that when there is a process in a system, an irreversible process, you have to take into account the way the system will evolve to the best functioning. And with the Entransy, you see that, of course, there is a storage of energy and a transmission of energy through an external system that will be a transducer between two heat contents. And how will go the system, how will transit the energy through this?
Annie, I think we can't hear you. The question came from Peter Stefan, so maybe you can get together at some point and answer his question. But if Professor Bo or Professor...
Do we need to distinguish between process and state properties? Sure, yeah, we always do. And we need to know what is what. And as I said, process is transient, it takes initial, comes to an end, and then you have it there. And I didn't quite understand the question. Entransy is the stored heat. We should talk about the stored heat property, not whether it's not a process property. Once you store it, process is finished. So it's a property. And to be honest, I can't believe that people could even think, sorry, that's my opinion, that we cannot store heat in a system. Really, a lot of people, you have it at home, you have a water heater, and I cannot, it's just a matter of simplicity to call it all basically internal energy. And then it's a modern now, and some sign up for it, and then doesn't like to open the eyes and mind and whatnot to see that those energies are different. If you heat a spring, it gets hot. If you compress the torsion spring with the same energy, it doesn't get hot, it stores mechanical energy. So systems store different types of energies, different types of works, and we could be able to account for them. If we don't know how, it doesn't mean we shouldn't.
Yeah. If there are some questions, yeah. Okay.
Shigeo Mariyama from the University of Tokyo. I actually have a question to Kostek and also Professor Go. So Kostek says that that's going back and forth, but finally, like if you define this variable as t squared s, it maybe sounds like okay to think about as some parameter and like so. It is really, I mean, you believe that this quantity, if we define by t squared s, you think it may be useful. Professor Go, do you agree to use the t squared s instead of the qt define entransy?
You mean the thermal energy or square of speed of light? Yes. So thermal mass, as I just mentioned, come from Einstein's mass-energy relation. This is not my idea. So this thermal mass, we can call that relativistic mass. So thermal mass energy, we can say this is a relativistic energy. There is very, very small, but it's quite useful for described heat transfer process.
Maybe some question.
Sure. Yeah, that was a question for me. Basically, ST square is not the same as entropy. It's entropy functional potential. The way PV is not the same as work, or TS is not the same as heat. It's a heat functional potential, very useful in free energy and enthalpy, and it should be used. But I would here not agree with Professor Gu. I would leave thermomass and phonon gas alone, because that might come later. It just more complicates and confuses things, and honestly I don't think it's helping or related. It's independent definition of something else. Enthalpy or entransy is well defined for me. It's an internal thermal energy times temperature, integral of it. But the problem is with internal thermal energy, and I hope I'll crack down the problem soon, but they cannot be uncoupled simply. It will look like something exergy. It will depend on some reference state.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Yes?
Trapez from France. I would have a comment and a question. In the last paper from Professor Guo about the optimization, which is, as I understood, the main purpose of this new variable. Actually, I'm not from thermodynamics, so you can mix any variable, it's the same for me. Most important for me is what we can do with it and what is the benefit. So you say it is for optimization. Optimization means reducing a cost function. I haven't seen any cost function this afternoon. So minimizing the cost function, you showed in your paper that moving from steady state to transient, you were obliged to modify the definition of your entrancey. So it was extended entrancey. Does it mean that we will have to change the definition for each new problem? And then, for example, in your simple example of the bar, you used entrancey for your optimization problem. But if you moved from an optimization, a global optimization, to another one, which would be, for example, minimizing the temperature at a given point in the bar, it is impossible that entrancey would give the solution. And furthermore, in your optimization, you could add other aspects. For example, the cost of the metal of the bar. And it isn't not in the entrancey definition, the price. So optimization, it's too global, and I doubt that such a simple definition would be useful for general optimization.
I would let Professor Gu answer. My understanding is economics is not part of this optimization.
I'm not very much catch your question. I think about global, that means system, right? System optimization. So what I just mentioned only for the optimization of heat transfer or optimization the thermal devices and so on. If we talk about the thermal system optimization, that means from point of view global situation. So in this case, we cannot only use the minimum initial dissipation thermal distance, but we can use such kind of concept as a constraint. Then we can make a global optimization for the thermal systems.
I think we are running out of time. I think it would take many more hours to discuss this. But what I would like to do, I would like to give I don't think we have time. We're running out of time. I'd like to give 1 minute to each speaker to give some concluding remarks, and then we conclude ourselves. Let me start with Professor.
1 minute. I think what I think you could read, I wrote a paper and then about Entransy, which is much more detailed than what I did. It's International Journal for Heat and Mass Transfer. And then about thermal energy and other issues, there is one very recent paper in Entropy last week, and you are invited to contribute your manuscript there. As far as Entransy, it is what it is, no more and no less, and we need to pursue it. We are not voting on it today, of course, and we cannot, and nobody could give us that responsibility, but we should and could talk about it in the future.
So I think we can put it into a historical perspective. So people thought the sun would move around the earth. It turned out it's not. People thought the earth is a flat plate. It turned out it's not. And if we really need Entransy, let's just wait.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I would like to ask Annie maybe a few words, including remarks.
Well, I hope that this conference will give the opportunity to people to work together very friendly, because science also is a pleasure, and when you work together fairly. And I was very interested to work with the Chinese team because they are fair people and they invent novel methods of optimization, and I thank them for their kindness and for the good science they make. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Probably a lot of you know that the Dean of the Heat Transfer Community is Professor Goldstein. Is he with us?
He's thinking.
Can we give the microphone to Professor Goldstein to make? No? Any comment about the panel?
I found it a very interesting discussion, and fortunately, more light than heat, while in the journals often there seems to be more heat than light.
Thank you very much. I think we need to think about that, what you said. I would ask Professor.
I welcome any question, any criticism, even very strong critics to our entry theory, because it will promote the development of our theory. Thank you very much.
So this brings our panel to a close. I thank the speakers, I thank the audience, and thank you very much for attending the panel. Thank you.
Excuse me, I want to thank to all the panelists for their excellent talk, and thanks to active participation of everyone. Due to the time limit, now we have to close the session, but I'm sure the debate will continue in the different form in the future. As a brief conclusion, I would like to congratulate the committee, organization committee to program this scientific debate. As far as I know, that's the first time in the so prestigious conference to have a scientific debate and let the both sides favor and against to express so straightly their opinion. I think it is a very good thing. Secondly, I would like to express my gratitude to Professor Guo for his passion and dedication of the science, and also for his opening mind for the facing to the challenge and the critics. As you know, many new concepts should undergo extensive and long time challenge and critiques. That I believe Professor Guo and his group will certainly continue to develop and improve along with these positive or negative comments. And I'm very happy you are so many to come at such fundamental debate, and especially some young research. As you know, the fundamental law of thermodynamics and some comprehensive analysis and optimization method as a very important way or effective way for the improvement, and it could lead to innovative development. Thank you for your comment. Thank you very much.